All right, thank you. On behalf of the Camden Conference, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. We would like to thank the Rockland Public Library and M. Lewis, our program chair, for making these programs possible and for hosting us again this conference year. So thanks, Em. The Camden Conference is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization fostering informed conversations on world issues. Free community lectures like this expand on our topics, and robust high school and college programs bring our in-depth experience to young audiences. This year's conference, our 39th, Today's Middle East, Power, Politics, and Players, will take place February 20th through 22nd, 2026, live at the Camden Opera House and streamed to both Rockland and Falmouth. For more information on our organization and the 2026 conference, please see camdenconference.org on the internet. However, there's really nothing like attending the weekend conference itself. Let this video convey that to you, please.
Should have sound. Sorry about that. Hang on. Okay, 0. Look at that.
This conference, it has an unerring knack for exploring the great issues of our time. The organizers of this weekend have pulled together, I think, a really stellar roster to help us, all of us, acquire a state-of-the-art understanding, to understand our communities, to understand our country, and to understand our world.
Township meetings bring liberty within people's reach. They teach people how to enjoy liberty and how to use it. And so it gives me great privilege to be here to be part of this exercise in civil liberties.
What you have here is very unique, and I do think that you should take the Camden Conference on a roadshow, because this conference has a very unique DNA.
The biggest problem is this: a lie told a million times becomes a fact. Without the facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. If you have no facts, no truth, no trust, you have no democracy. This is what we need to fight for.
I was wondering what advice you all have for those who want to change the world, both in their careers and their social lives.
We have the opportunity to invent new models, to do things differently.
It's a provocative conference. It makes you think. It keeps you alert, keeps you alive in terms of being a citizen of the world.
It's giving me this insight that you don't get just from reading the newspaper.
To meet people from different parts of the world or with different perspectives is just such an eye-opening experience.
What I find here is stimulating, intriguing,
informative,
energizing,
brain-bending,
enlightened,
just brilliant.
Well, tonight, as part of the Camden Conference Community Event Series, it is my pleasure to introduce Norm Olsen, who will share his insights on prospects for Middle East peace. Cape Elizabeth native Norm served 26 years in the United States Foreign Service, with a total of 9 years in Israel and the Gaza Strip. His first tour of duty as a Gaza reporting officer and USAID representative spanned the First Intifada, the Madrid talks, the secret Oslo negotiations, the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, and the return of Yasser Arafat to Palestine. His reporting during that time was recognized by his award of a National Human Intelligence Reporting Award from the U.S. intelligence community. His second tour of duty as chief of the embassy political section spanned the Second Intifada, the efforts of quartet negotiator James Wolfenson, the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, the victory of Hamas in U.S.-demanded Palestinian elections, the successful Hamas expulsion of U.S.-backed Fatah militants who were terrorizing Gaza, and the Israeli-Lebanon war. He retired as a senior Foreign Service officer in 2008 and has remained active in Israeli and Palestinian affairs. Please give a warm welcome to Norm Olsen.
Hi, thank you all for turning out tonight. A lot of depressing news in the world today, and it's nice that you could make time out of your schedule to talk about this depressing situation, which is still important even though it's not getting the coverage that it has for a long time. So I come from Cape Elizabeth. Yes? A little more like that? Any better? Okay. Thank you all for being here. Did you get that part? Okay. First of all, if anybody needs a break to go to the head or anything, please feel free. We want to be comfortable here. I thank you all for coming. It's great to see Joe Dondas here, a Camden Conference stalwart and a friend of ours from when I worked at the Portland Press Herald with her husband. You've been led here under false pretenses because I'm actually not going to talk about prospects for peace because there aren't any prospects for peace. And I think you'll see that by the time we get done. My objective here is to talk about root causes, because I learned early in the Foreign Service, from my first tour in Jamaica even, that there's always root causes that don't come to the surface. That was reaffirmed when I served in Kosovo before the Kosovo War, when we were in the first peacekeeping mission there. And we had looked on the Balkan Wars as having the Croats as our buddies and the good guys and the Serbs being the bad guys. Except when you read about it, you learned that the Croats had massacred 250,000 Orthodox Serbs at Janisovac during World War II, just boom, 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 mostly by cutting the throat. So you learn that your present friend is not necessarily your earlier friend, and there's always a root cause that you need to address if you're going to solve the problem. That's my view anyway, you can see. So we'll talk about a couple of underlying themes. One is poor drafting of documents. Documents that become the benchmarks of future discussions, but they were manifestly faulty to begin with. Deliberately poor drafting, that is obfuscation, leaving things deliberately untended. Mercenary drafting, that is where you're actually looking to put the screws to the other person who is in such a desperate situation that he can't object during the drafting, but later you throw the draft back at him. Anyway, and really more the everlasting life of poorly drafted documents. So, also, my own background, I come from Cape Elizabeth, from a commercial fishing family, and I went to Colby College where I met my wife, Pat, there in the violet sweater, and worked for 10 years in the fishing industry and as a newspaper reporter before we joined the Foreign Service in 1983. So, I was assigned to Gaza in 1991 after being way late in the assignment cycle and not having any post that I could get. It's a bidding system where you put in a number of requests and you try to find a post that wants you for what you offer, and I couldn't find a post that offered anything. So way late in the bidding cycle, the person who was going to be the Gaza reporting officer dropped out, took another assignment, and suddenly in March of 1991, it was available at the same time that missiles were falling on Tel Aviv. And my family and I were watching the TV during R&R in Hawaii, and the kids are saying, Dad, there's missiles falling there. And I'm talking to Tel Aviv on the phone, and I'm saying, kids, that'll all be over by the time we get there in September. So that's how we got there, and it turned out to be a wonderful assignment because it was the only assignment I had in the Foreign Service where I had a good deal of freedom. My job was to go to Gaza, meet people, and find out what the heck was going on. And that was a great job. It was what a newspaper reporter does when he's given free rein, or a foreign correspondent, and what I always thought foreign service officers should be doing out there. So before we go any farther, I'm going to turn off this microphone, please, and turn this one on, I think. Okay, does that work now? Okay. And we're going to find out where we are. So, can you see the map? Okay, it's beautiful, I know. The West Bank, Israel, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan down here, Saudi Arabia, and the Sinai. The canal is over here. So, I put up the map of Maine because it's a good idea to find out what you know about the Gaza Strip and about the West Bank. So, any idea how, well, first of all, anybody have any idea how big Israel is compared to the United States? Yep, New Hampshire, Maryland. Yeah, no, a little bigger than that, okay. So, that makes the West Bank pretty small. So in terms of Maine, I can show you, I won't make you guess. In terms of Maine, the West Bank is smaller than Cumberland and York counties, okay? It's a little bit bigger than Lincoln, Knox, and Saginaw. And it's smaller than Waldo, Knox, and Lincoln together. And the reason I point that out is, you okay? Oh, I can use this, I guess. Okay. The reason I point that out is you've got to realize how crammed it is, the dynamic there. This is really amateur hour, I know. So you have to realize how small it is and how much tension there is and how many people. So right now, if you, oh, by the way, the Gaza Strip is about the size of the towns of Brunswick, Freeport, Yarmouth, Cumberland, Falmouth, and Portland. That's all. It's got 2.3 million people in it. So, since I'm at the map, I will just do something quickly here. Now, you're thinking that this is the West Bank, right? We'll take this dot. I'm going to put all these dots here. Consider that 854 dots. In each one of them is a physical barrier to Palestinian movement. So if you live in, to transpose here, if you live in South Rockland, there'll be a barrier before you can get there. There's certainly 2 barriers on the road to Camden. You can't go to Rockport at all, that's off. And that's the way it is all the way around. And that is interlaced. That is interlaced with, of course, about 100 Israeli settlements, okay, all of which are connected by roads on which Palestinians are not allowed to travel. So if you think of your area, remember, what to say, Knox, Lincoln, and Saginaw counties, it's pretty hard to get around. So, okay, so let me start from the real root cause. Modern Zionism started in about the 1870s with Theodor Herzl and a group of European Jews who decided that Jews should have a place to go. They'd been through pogroms in Eastern Europe and the Pale of Russia and other places. Have to get my breath here. And they started an effort based mostly in Britain and with the support of the Rothschilds and others to find a place for Jews to have a homeland. And it didn't start just with Palestine. There were originally 5 places that were under consideration in the 1870s and 1880s. Those places included Palestine, Patagonia, Uganda, Isle Royale in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and one other that I can't remember right now. So, in each case, of course, people would have to be displaced, although not so many in Patagonia. And if you want to go to Wikipedia, there's a good entry on, I think it's called the Uganda Scheme or the Uganda Project, which details all the considerations that were being put into whether Uganda would be the right place for the new Israeli state, new Zionist state. So Eventually, they settled on Palestine. And that movement progressed through the rule of the Ottoman Empire, which by the early 20th century had been going on for over 400 years. And the Ottomans were nothing if not paper shufflers. So you can document property ownership, transfers, births, deaths, marriages, everything in Palestine via the Ottoman records. But what we're talking about primarily is land ownership. So the movement gained steam and was gaining steam when World War I broke out. And as you all know, we had a document called the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was Britain's demonstration of favor toward the formation of a Palestinian homeland for the Jewish people. So now there are some questions, and I don't have the answers, but questions to be asked. Why Palestine? Well, it was a historic homeland. The Ottoman Empire was fading, right? The Brits weren't going to give up Uganda, where they had colonized. Patagonia, kind of far off. Canadians weren't necessarily going to give up Isle Royale. So Palestine was settled on. And you had a people who had been under occupation by Istanbul for 400 years. So as this was going on, the Brits, having entered World War I, were now looking at what's going to happen in the Middle East. And the Middle East had a key element that Britain needed and the West wanted, but the Brits really needed it. And that was fuel, because the British fleet, which dominated the high seas, was converting from coal, which is a horrible motor fuel for ships, into bunker C and other petroleum products that would make their fleet worldwide capable. They had already established a protectorate, I guess I'll call it, in Iraq. So they already had influence there, but that oil was all the way around, down through the Suez Canal, up into the Persian Gulf before they could get it. So the idea of Palestine won some favor among British Jewry and among British politicians. At the same time, Sykes and Picot, the British and French diplomats, were busy, divvying up the Middle East by drawing lines in the sand that nobody else understood. And, and then when pressed in the war, that was 1916, in 1917, I'm sorry. Okay. In 1917, under pressure from the Palestine, the Zionist Committee pressing Palestine, and with the war still unwon, in 1917, at the time of the Balfour Declaration, the Ottomans were still had not been defeated, and the Brits had still not taken Jerusalem. Yet they issued the Balfour Declaration and to gain the support of world Jewry. Now, how mercenary that was or not, I don't know. There's plenty of books that have been written on it. But that was the timeline. And here's the case we have of the first horrible drafting. So, everybody familiar with the Balfour Declaration? Okay. I'll read it. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. That's the first clause, and it's the one everybody knows. The second clause, I see Jim nodding his head there. The second clause, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Almost immediately, that second clause disappeared. It disappeared from the myth, it disappeared from, not from true history, but it disappeared from common parlance. And so after the war, when the League of Nations, So after the war ended, and the League of Nations delivered Palestine to the British mandate, the Sykes-Picot negotiations came into play. What happened was we had all the countries here, Lebanon, Syria, Transjordan, Egypt, and Palestine. All of those had been under Ottoman domination for 400 years. And the question was what to do with them. It was a mandate for the Brits and the British in Palestine and Jordan and Egypt, and the French in Lebanon and Syria to lead them to self-determination. So during the 20s, or when the mandate began, the Jewish population of what was then Palestine was about 3% of the population, and almost no land ownership. But immigration began, some legal, some illegal. Sorry. And the Brits didn't know what to do with it. So the Zionists were looking for independence, or a free state, and they had the favor of the British Empire. But the Palestinians also were, the Arab Palestinians, were looking for that. And so twice during the 20 years between the end of World War I and World War II, they petitioned for self-determination. Formal petitions gone through the League of Nations process. Actually, all 5 nations did, okay? Lebanon, Syria, Transjordan, and Egypt were all approved, all went to self-determination, all formed governments. Palestine was denied twice. Now, I am not going to try and interpret why they were denied twice, or maybe I will. But so one of the things was the Balfour Declaration. They have still an obligation there to support this Jewish state. But the other was, and if I drew the map, you'd find that Jordan is here. It borders on, by a strange permutation of lines by Gertrude Bell, it borders way out here on Iraq. And by bordering on Iraq and the British maintaining control of Palestine, they could put the pipeline from Basra all the way to Haifa and fuel the British fleet there, rather than have to run them all the way around Saudi Arabia. So there was self-interest, there was kind of mercenary advantage taken, and the Palestinians were denied any right of self-determination. Well, thanks. Yeah. So World War II breaks out, and we all know where that went, and we've all seen the movie Exodus. We know about illegal and legal determination. And the violence exploded in 47 and 48 as the Zionist movement wanted to establish a state in Palestine, and the Palestinian Arabs decided they didn't want to be governed by a Jewish state, or frankly, any other state of which they were not leaders. So at the time of the 1948 partition plan, the Jewish population of Palestine had grown to 33%, definitely a minority, right, a third of the population. That 33% owned only 6% of the land. But in the demarcation plan, the Zionists were given 66% of the entire, 55% of the entire land of Palestine. Now that made some sense in the way that you divide it and you let the people go with those of their kind, of their race, of their culture. But the problem was that the Zionists were not a majority anywhere except a couple of little places. There was a cluster in Beersheba, there was a cluster here in Tel Aviv, some up in the Galilee, I forget the name of this ancient settlement there. But when the lines were drawn, they took a center here and said, well, they're not the majority, but there is a concentration of Zionists there, so we'll give them this. And that included thousands of Bedouin and other Palestinian families. And it's the same way throughout. So if you saw the maps that were on the announcement for this presentation, you'll see how it went from what it was in Ottoman times to 48 and onward. But in each case, while the Zionists could have a concentration there, they didn't necessarily have the majority of the population. So you had a minority governing a majority of Arabs in each of these enclaves. So the best example I could give would be if you took the demographics of Maine and you looked at the Somali concentrations in Lewiston, Auburn, and Portland, right? Right here and here, and you said, well, we're going to break up the state of Maine, and we're going to make a Somali immigrant state in Cumberland, York, and Androscoggin counties. Not because they're a majority, but because that's where they're concentrated. Get it? Okay. So we still were not talking majority rule. We were talking minority rule of a majority, but in the minority's state. You might say it's the same people who gave us the partition of India and Pakistan. And you know how that went. So that led to the fighting. Okay, there's absolutely no doubt the Arabs fought like hell. They were overwhelmed. And the myth of the Jewish weakness of being the subordinate player is manifestly false. And there's a whole new legion of Israeli historians, Benny Morris, Ilan Pape, get the other one. Anyway, you can look about the new Israeli historians who have gone back through the records and documented this. And the reason I got interested in it was that during our first tour, we got to see the underground, illicit Zionist ammunition factory buried in a cellar in Tel Aviv, where they turned out weapons in the years leading up to the war, the War of Independence, and manufactured arms and ammunition. So it wasn't like there was just peaceful people on both sides waiting there. Now, the other thing we found was that I had good Israeli friends with whom I used to go wild boar hunting, right? Whatever. Anyway, we went out, we had wonderful fun. And, jump back. So during the war, 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled to Gaza, a much reduced Gaza Strip. Gaza used to be a lot bigger. Much reduced Gaza Strip, and to the West Bank, okay? And since then, there has been a line which we heard as early as late as 2019 while leading a tour to Israel, that Israel became a land without a people for a people without a land. And our Israeli guide actually used that line on us and told us that there were no Palestinian Arabs or any other Arabs in Greater Palestine in 1947. They were all shipped in by the other countries that were truly anti-Semitic and just hated Jews. So I had to pull my tour group aside and actually tell them that wasn't quite right. So now, the Nakba, as they call it, the catastrophe, drove those Palestinians out, left a good many Palestinians, hundreds of thousands, still within Israel. And they became Israeli citizens, although having supervised the drafting of the human rights report and the other human rights reports at Embassy Tel Aviv for years, I can tell you they are decidedly second-class citizens. They can't own property that's being developed by the Israel Lands Authority, and on and on. But there were 700 Arab villages in what is now Israel that are now no longer there. And the argument from Israel is that, well, they were never there because there were never any Palestinian Arabs there. And so the claim that 700,000 villages left and there were 700 villages is just manifestly wrong. And I learned early during my first tour that that wasn't quite right because I used to hunt with Uncle Shraga. And Uncle Shraga had been a teenager during the War of Independence. And his job was to position himself in the Benaya settlements, which are about here. It's where we used to go hunting, inland from Ashdod. And his job as a teenager was to shoot and kill any Palestinian who tried to return to his property. And so that's just my observation from these fellows I dealt with all the time, and they didn't hide it. But then the research has shown that there was a lot more to it than that. It wasn't just, these people in one settlement shooting at Palestinians, because during the war, the IDF issued General Order Number 40. General Order Number 40, which you can look up, ordered the erasure of Palestinian existence from land controlled by Israel. And it's quite a read. So if you go around, you go to all these places where Palestinians say, my village used to be here, you won't find anything because they were erased. And it'll be erased to the last cinder block. So that's how I found out about this. I said, told about all this all the time. And Uncle Schrager and the guy said, well, we made sure that wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to return. So the next step was the issuance of the absentee laws. And the absentee laws, which are also on the web, are a whole series of laws administered by Israel right after the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. And they began with, I can't give you the exact order, but you'll understand. It began with any Palestinian Arab engaged in armed conflict against Israel, Israeli forces, can never return to his home. Banned. And then it became any Palestinian who fled toward enemy lines during the war could never return to his homeland. Then it became any Palestinian who was present in an enemy state, any of the Arab states, during the war, could never return to their homeland. And then, and these are amendments all along. Then it was any Palestinian who did not remain on his land during the war could never return to his home. So you could have been in the United States or France if you weren't on your property. So, and it goes on and on. And that was backed up by then the erasure of those properties. So, no compensation, no right of return. And that's what the right of return means. It becomes sort of normalized. Well, there's no right of return. Why would they want to return? Well, they actually lost their homes and property with no compensation, whether they engaged in combat or not, in the attempt to stop a state, a religious and secular state of another religion being imposed upon them. So, now, of course, during 1967, there was another huge displacement when Palestinians were pushed out of the West Bank and many sent into refugee camps. And that was the beginning of the what we call the settlement enterprise. So you had hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons. Remember, they're not refugees because they're still in their country, even though it isn't officially a state. So they're IDPs. I'm sorry, back a little bit. 1948. So Harry Truman is being pressed to recognize the state of Israel. The question is, should he do it? Should he not do it? What are the pros and cons? And as you all know from decades of accusations against the State Department, the entire foreign policy, thank you, the entire foreign policy administration recommended against recognizing the state of Israel. They said the complications are too severe, the implication for national security interests, et cetera, et cetera. And Truman was swayed by somebody, apparently a friend of his, immediately after the Declaration of Independence, to declare a state of Israel, and he did. And the question is, why didn't he also declare a state of Palestine? I mean, the demarcation lines were set by the United Nations, so why couldn't he have done both? And that's one of those mistakes that then becomes enshrined, sort of like bad drafting. You don't bother to think of the other side of the coin that could have perhaps obviated all the violence of the last 80 years. But it is kind of a simple question, and frankly, one that I never entertained when I was serving there. It just seemed, yeah, he did Israel. Well, why didn't he do Palestine? But in doing so, he also cut off any opportunity for the rest of the international community to do anything because the United States already had a United Nations veto and already was the dominant player in the post-war world. So by 1949, Israel is not only a state, but it's got UN membership, and there's nothing for the Palestinians, many of whom are living in refugee camps displaced from their property with no compensation. Now, sorry to be going back and forth here. Hope you can see it. So we got what we call the green line, which is the ceasefire line where the war stopped in 48, and then it was reinforced again in 1967 by military occupation of the West Bank, separating it from the rest of Israel and putting it under martial law. So Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, since 1967, have been subordinated under Israeli military law not civil law, like Israeli settlers in the territories. The United States didn't do anything about it. Passed up an opportunity to be in there somewhere and try and negotiate a peace. But at the time was the post-war world. Everybody had a full appetite of murder and mayhem, Holocaust, everything throughout the world, like 25 million dead or something. So there was no appetite for any of this. So, by the way, various UN resolutions called for the right of Palestinians to return to their homes and property, okay? Not to the nation of Palestine, but to their homes and property. That was ignored. There's been probably 20 UN General Assembly resolutions calling for the same thing. General Assembly resolutions are not binding. So the UN could veto such a resolution in the Security Council, and then it could pass in the General Assembly, but it meant nothing. So there was no power of enforcement there. Now, during this time, the United States did stand firm on a couple of things. Eisenhower stopped the Israelis and the British from taking over the Suez Canal, okay, which, by the way, plays a key role in all this. And later, Jimmy Carter negotiated the Camp David Accords. And frankly, he has been demonized ever since because he saw that there was injustice in the conflict and that there would be no settlement of conflict without addressing those original grievances. So he died being the total enemy of the Israeli state as far as they were concerned. But he did put together the Sinai Accord, which is the only working peace agreement accord that has been standing in the Middle East without impediment since 1977, in which Sinai is demarcated in a very specific, detailed document that identifies by coordinate every military unit, previously of Israel and Egypt, but since the evacuation of Sinai, only Egypt, demarcates zones, identifies the number of vehicles and personnel and types of vehicles and types of personnel that can be in any given area at any given time, and it's been upheld with United States support for all those years. So what I'm talking about is a clearly drafted document that was aimed at rectifying a problem and being balanced on both sides so that it could be enforced. And that was the one agreement of this whole time that's actually worked. So I got to Israel in 1991, First Intifada, and my job was to go into the Gaza Strip on a regular basis, try to make it 2 times a week, and go down and monitor USAID projects. And that was it was an unusual relationship that is a whole nother story on why a State Department officer would be doing it, but I was doing it. So at the time, I arrived as Jim Baker and George Bush were pressing for the Madrid talks between all the parties in the group here. And that was the rare occasion when the United States decided that it should be addressing a problem that had been festering for, 50 years, 40 years at the time? And that there was no point, there was no positive in letting that conflict go on the way it was. It was creating turmoil all throughout the Middle East. We'd been through the 67 war and the 73 war. The Suez Canal had been closed for 6 years? Was it? Creating a whole new military engagement around the world and violently shifting the oil industry. And they decided they actually needed to address that. So Baker is the instrument of the policy, pressed Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, who eventually agreed to go to the Madrid talks and actually put Israelis and Palestinians in the same rooms on specified topics: water sharing in the Jordan, demilitarization of the Jordan Valley, aquifers in the West Bank, whatever. And that structure, some of those committees continue to today. They're about the only vestige of it. And they made progress. Shamir, by the way, I need to mention this. Shamir, we talk about terrorists all the time. And I was at a meeting a year ago when somebody said, we need to talk about terrorism. We need to talk about that. Oh, sorry, hold that arm up. We need to talk about terrorism. And I finally had to say, look, we could go a lot farther if we didn't talk about terrorism. But if you want to do so, we can talk about Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir ordering the assassination of Count Volker Bernadotte, the UN mediator. Or we can talk about Menachem Begin, Prime Minister, ordering the bombing of the King David Hotel. And we can go on and on if you want. So we need to get past that. But Shamir, who was a real hardhead, bent to Baker's will after a memorable line in which Baker said something to the effect of, when you decide to get serious, here's the number of the White House switchboard, give me a call. So when I got there, Madrid had started, fitfully, going back and forth. And it was a success. It was moderate success. Shamir later lost the election to Rabin, who became the peacemaker. But the key point out of this was, I think for all future politicians, that Bush lost the next election. And whether it was directly the result of anything to do with Israel and Palestinian Zionists, or whether it was a better campaign by Clinton or not, the Clinton administration took that to heart. And Palestine dropped way down low on the totem pole of issues, and he turned it over to a select group of people who basically all came from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a pro-Israel think tank. And Martin Indyk, Dennis Ross, Aaron Miller. And sort of went into dormancy. The Madrid process continued, but was kind of in dormancy. The Palestinians engaged very well, except that, of course, they had internecine warfare because the chairman of the Madrid delegation was based in Palestine, Dr. Haider Abdel-Shafi, and he was the chairman, but all the key players, historically, Faisal Husseini, Hanan Ashrawi, Nabil Shaf, and others, were based in Jerusalem. And they had enjoyed the attention of the Western world for years, among other things because Western diplomats found it a lot easier to meet Palestinians in the lovely flowered courtyard of the American Colony Hotel than they did to drive into Gaza to see Haider Abdel-Shafi. So, so I got there, and I'm monitoring these aid projects, and I'm not seeing much progress, but I started picking up signs that something was happening, and there was sort of a rumble out there about what could happen if Gaza went to autonomy. This is, again, a derivative of the Madrid talks, but getting a little bit more back channels. And to make a long story short, I uncovered some information that resulted in that Human Intelligence Award, that in fact, Yasser Arafat himself supported Gaza going to autonomy before the West Bank or before the two together. And the fact that the two units would only progress politically together had been a foundational item of US policy and Palestinian policy for decades. So I found this, we'll tell you quickly how it happened. I used to go into the Gaza Strip, drive a fully armored Chevy Caprice with a 454 cubic inch engine and go all over the place. And for my first 18 months there, I had a Palestinian employee with me, Salah Saka, you're a great help, who taught me the way around. I couldn't read Arabic, I didn't speak Arabic because I was the last officer assigned there who didn't speak Arabic. And so I had to memorize my way around the entire Gaza Strip. So I'd meet all these people, and I'm sitting in the winter of 2003, maybe like February, March. It's freezing cold, it's wet outside. I'm in this room in the Palestinian Union of Industrialists with my friend Nasser Siraj, and he's like this, because they don't have any central heat, smoking, one right after the other. And we'd been working around to this for months, and finally, in a total violation of US policy, I broached the subject of, well, all the major issues that divide the parties focus on the West Bank. But Gaza is suffering, so why can't Gaza go to autonomy first? And he says, that's a good question. I will raise that with Chairman Arafat. I'm thinking, oh my Jesus. Everybody is reading every bit of communication into and out of Palestine and Gaza Strip, the CIA and the Mossad and everything. So now he's going to go on the fax machine, which is how he communicated with Tunis. And he's going to say, this guy from the American Embassy is proposing Gaza go to autonomy before the West Bank. I think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? And of course, I raised the question, having no idea that he actually had a direct link into Arafat's compound in Tunis. So I go away thinking, I hope I never hear of this topic again. And I go down about a week later, and he says, I've received a communication from Chairman Arafat, and he agrees that Gaza can go to autonomy before the West Bank. I think, oh, shit again, you know? Well, in fact, what had happened was the Oslo negotiations were going on. They were entirely secret. I knew nothing about them myself. The State Department knew about them, Martin and Nick and Dennis Ross and all those others, and they completely disregarded them. They were going nowhere. Nothing was going to happen without the United States. And they, frankly, pissed all over them, you know, just gave them no credence. And here I am talking to some guy in Gaza in a freezing cold office, chain smoking, who has a direct link in Chairman Arafat's office, his suite. So that, I put it in a cable, right? I'm obligated to put it in a cable, even though it's potentially going to screw me. And it turned out that was one of the final things that proved to the State Department and the White House that the Palestinians were sincerely interested in doing something and that the Oslo Accords had traction. So it was a great moment, won an award, that was that. So by this time, Yitzhak Shamir is prime minister, right? They agree. We were on home leave in Cape Elizabeth when the word came out across the paper, peace in Israel, or whatever it was, peace in Palestine, Oslo Accord to be signed and everything. And to this day, two of the architects of the Oslo Accords, are good friends of ours and visit us each year. So, well, at that point, of course, the White House took over. The White House took credit for everything. Signed it on the lawn as if the couldn't have been done without the White House. And we moved on, but we never, and we did so with the goodwill of Yitzhak Rabin. And today, you'll have people say Oslo was a waste, it wasn't any good, it wasn't specific enough, it had too many hopes, not enough plans. And the answer is, that's wrong. It was a good document. It depended on two leaders who were working together, much as Rabin hated to shake Arafat's hand. And Rabin was committed to it, and he was going to carry through. And then he was assassinated, and that was it. And I've called it before the most successful political assassination in history, because it achieved exactly what the assassin wanted. It wasn't, you know, killing Archduke Francis Ferdinand because you hate the Austrians. And it wasn't the assassin of President Garfield or even Lincoln. You know, assassinating Lincoln didn't win the Confederacy the war, right? It stopped the peace process in its tracks, brought us Shimon Peres, and then brought us Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, who's now been in power for most of the last 30 years. And that stopped the process. The document remained good. It should have been implemented. But what happened was the United States never tried to enforce any of the intentions. And the grain absolutely went against the Palestinians. For every Israeli provocation and Palestinian reprisal, there would be a condemnation of the Palestinian reprisal. There would never be a notice of the initial Israeli provocation, be it a settlement, be it a road blockage, be it anything else. And I say this because I was there for the first 4 years. My first 4 years included 2 under Oslo, and I know how we looked at it and how we enforced it. And even with Rabin there, it was difficult. Once he left, there was no appetite whatsoever to do anything about provocations or increased settlements or outposts or anything else. So I ended my tour in Israel in 1995, went off to Geneva, went off to Moldova, Kosovo for 7 years. And during 1999-2000, the Clinton administration was holding talks to try and bring about a peace agreement. Second Intifada was underway, continuing violence. And they get to Camp David and then Sharm el-Sheikh, and they come up with what the Clinton White House and the Israelis termed the deal of the century. So it didn't originate with Trump, it originated there. Deal of the century, it's perfect, gives Arafat 97% of the West Bank and Gaza and et cetera, et cetera. And I was in Moldova at the time as Deputy Chief Mission. And I remember day after day, go to my maps, talk to people, in Israel and Gaza. Talked to them, tried to lay it out on the map, and there was no way I could make it come out to 97%, let alone all the other aspects of the agreement. So, I'm confused. Of course, I don't have, geomapping, and I don't have all the details and everything else, but I've got enough to know that it doesn't wash. So when I got reassigned to Israel, I immediately went to Washington and met up with a woman named Connie Mayer, who was the keeper of the secrets, the keeper of the maps, the coordinates, all the secret stuff in the Bureau of Intelligence Research. I said, Connie, I can't make it work. I've looked at it. The numbers don't work. The parameters don't work. Nothing. I said, what's the story? She says, that's because it doesn't work. The deal isn't there. It's not 97%. It doesn't come close. And she just went right through how all the propaganda surrounding that deal was propaganda. And that somebody had to be blamed for a failure in the Clinton of the Clinton administration's effort. And it wasn't going to be Ehud Barak, so it had to be Yasser Arafat. Now remember, he is a bad guy. Hamas are bad guys. I'm not making anything to show that these are wonderful people, although we have wonderful friends there that we try and help financially during this war. But what is the interest of the United States? What's the national security interest of the United States in peace in the Middle East? I'd say it's pretty strong. And we're not doing anything to promote that, to enhance it, or taking any tough decisions. So the agreement ended in the negotiations ended in chaos. Arafat was banned, just went completely to pieces. So, hang on. Now, by the time I got back in 2002 as chief of the political section, we were pretty much beyond all those talks. Arafat was the bad guy, right, probably rightfully so in many respects. And the issue was, what happens then? Because there's not going to be any peace agreement, there's not going to be any land swaps or anything else. So we got into issues of movement and access, because the Israelis were continually tightening restrictions on Gaza and the West Bank, blocking people from going back and forth, products and everything else. So this was the time when Ariel Sharon decided he was going to build a border wall around Gaza. Now, remember, Gaza is not a separate nation, but it's under Israeli occupation, and under the Fourth Geneva Convention, Israel had certain obligations to not hinder food production and commerce and all that kind of stuff. So, I'll start over here again. Okay. Let's say this is the West Bank, right? Okay. Here's Jerusalem. Here's Jerusalem. So Sharon decides he's going to build a barrier all the way around the West Bank, 400 and something kilometers. And in Jerusalem, if you've been there, it's high concrete barriers and checkpoints and everything. The rest of the way out in the farmland, it's concertina wire, ditch, raked ground where you can see footprints, asphalt road, concrete barrier topped by chain link fence and concertina wire, and then the same thing on the other side for 50 meters across. So this swath takes 50 meters width all the way around, okay? But then he did something really brilliant. This is the green line, right here, okay? That's the ceasefire line. Sharon built much of the barrier on the Palestinian side of the green line. Not everywhere, but basically claimed a kilometer or so everywhere along the way, claiming that he needed that for security, because you couldn't have the barrier right up against Israeli towns in present-day Israel. And the United States never said a word. So they built this barrier, 400-something kilometers, with all these buffer zones. And then, lo and behold, they realized that, my gosh, the barrier has succeeded in stopping trespassers. So, back up. Yeah, so the barrier has stopped people coming across, right? It's patrolled, it's got electronic stuff and everything. Under the absentee laws, remember I mentioned earlier? If a Palestinian has land and does not either live on it or use it for agriculture, that is, plant agriculture. It can be taken as state land by the Israeli occupation forces after 7 years. So the barrier had so few entry points that the farmers on this side couldn't access their land on the Israeli side. It's still Palestinian territory, but they can't get to it. And since they couldn't cultivate it, it then could be taken for state land, and all that buffer zone is now filled with Israeli settlements. So thousands and thousands of acres that were going to be buffer zone, Palestinian land in the West Bank as designed by the ceasefire line are now Israeli suburbs. We didn't do anything about it. Now you also see, I'm going to go to questions here in just a minute. Okay, so at this time we're reporting on stuff going on, and the Consulate General in Jerusalem is reporting on stuff going on. And we would report, for instance, that the proposal for the E1 block here, east of Jerusalem, to build a settlement there, will irrevocably divide the West Bank north to south and prevent Palestinians from going north to south. So it's like saying Lincoln and Knox counties are firm, you can't go there anymore, period. Remember, these are tiny places, right? So, and each time, there would be one of two responses, which would be, Washington doesn't want to hear that. And the other would be, can you prove that it permanently makes a Palestinian state impossible? Can you prove it? Well, I don't know how you prove it, because the line was, well, you know, even if they build a settlement there, it can eventually be turned over to the Palestinians, or it can be bulldozed and they can get it back. But it would have to be a negotiation between the two parties. Well, of course, there were no negotiations, and the Palestinians are so asymmetrically disadvantaged that there would never be a turnover of a centimeter of land, let alone a settlement. So you'll notice I mentioned E1, because E1 has just been given approval for construction. Okay. 20 years ago, I went up there and surveyed the site for the embassy because the Israelis were saying that all the site work there was just erosion control. So I go up there, I can see the water mains being laid and the terracing for the townhouses and all the foundations going in. And I said, you know, actually that's a settlement under construction. And Washington said, well, the Israelis say it's not. So again, we didn't do anything. There was never a word uttered about it. So Sharon was really a master at handling the United States. And he said many times, the Americans are easy to handle. So, so he proceeded with that. And at the same time, under the George W. Bush administration, we had Elliott Abrams, who was the White House representative to Israel, completely bypassing the embassy on most occasions. Elliott Abrams, if you know, was interviewed in the New York Times yesterday or today, supporting the invasion of Venezuela because the United States has the right to do that. So, and Abrams was really funny because we'd find, you know, American officials, executive branch officials need what's called country clearance to visit a country that is where U.S. has a representative. So they have to write and say, National Security Advisor Elliott Abrams wishes to visit, okay? And we have to write back and say we welcome him. Elliott didn't bother with that because he said all his visits were just to visit his buddy Ehud Olmert, who, by the way, was mentoring Abrams' son while Abrams' son was living in Israel. So they were unofficial visits. I'm sure they never talked about anything to do with policy. But there was nothing to do about it because in any discussion in the White House, he was always the last man in the room with the president, right? How are you going to attack that? So meanwhile, the CIA, when I was there in 2000, 2005, was conducting its own foreign policy. And the CIA operates in the West Bank and Gaza under an executive order. What do they call it? A finding, an intelligence finding that gives them autonomy to do things completely outside and without the knowledge of the rest of the U.S. government. So I would find out about this stuff because what they were doing, because I would hear from the Palestinians. Oh yeah, they were in the other day, and they were saying this and that, and they were saying that they won't support the Palestinian government unless Mohammed Dahlan, famous ruthless militia leader Mohammed Dahlan, is part of the Palestinian government. And at the time, this is just one example. So Abu Mazen didn't want him in. He was a contender and he was violent. He'd been responsible for a lot of assassinations during and before Oslo. But the CIA had long ago decided that he was their man, that he and only he could mount the resources in Gaza to defeat Hamas. So I was arguing all the time with the agency about that, because my point was, he says he can defeat Hamas. It's not that he can, it's that he's the only person foolish enough to claim that he can do it, and you're believing him. So I'll just go one more thing, and then we'll open the question. So there's all talk about the Hamas coup that took over Gaza. And that happened in 2007, when Dahlan decided that he had the moxie and the cojones to put his US-funded and US-trained militia together, and he was going to go in and drive Hamas out of Gaza. Now remember, Hamas won the election that were demanded by Condi Rice, okay? So they won in free and fair elections. And Hamas won not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. But as soon as they won in the election, we and the Israelis put Gaza only under total blockade. We let the Palestinians stand in the West Bank. So there was our punishment. We were going to take care of Hamas. So Dahlan, who now resides in the UAE and is a multimillionaire, conveniently was in Cairo, not Gaza, and turned his militia loose, and Hamas took them out, stopped them. They went on for weeks and weeks, blackmailing and extorting, pillaging, attacking people, seizing cars, seizing homes, everything. And finally Hamas, which had won the election but had not taken power, decided they had to do something about it. And that was what is then described as the Hamas coup that drove out the Fatah forces. So, about Condi Rice. Condi Rice was not up to the job as far as I'm concerned. And the meetings I attended where she was with Ariel Sharon, it was like a grandfather talking to his 5-year-old, a grandfather talking to his 5-year-old little girl, and just kind of feckless and no impact whatsoever. But she had demanded that in 2005, she first showed up in November 2005, having been basically unannounced. We probably knew 24 hours ahead that they were going to stop. And she decided that we had been having this trouble getting Palestinian goods across the Green Line in and out of the West Bank, and it was really crippling the Palestinian economy. So she decided that she was going to make up for the embarrassment of Saudi Arabia, and quickly called a conference of the Palestinians, including Mohammed Dahlan, and of the Israelis. And we negotiated all night at the La Roma Hotel in Jerusalem. And it was amazing, because it was clearly making up for embarrassment. We were doing something just so there would be a deliverable on the trip. Otherwise, she was going to go home with no deliverable. And any of you who've worked in politics and government, you have to have a deliverable on every mission. So we negotiated all night. I remember sitting there with our ambassador, Dick Jones, a 4-time ambassador on his 4th ambassadorial tour. And me and my economic section counterpart saying, look, this absolutely cannot work. Here's why, and laying it all out. And him saying, yeah, it won't, but if we don't put this in the paper, we won't have anything. And so we negotiated all night. 5 o'clock in the morning, we have to get together. There's this paper. It's got meaningless stuff on it, stuff that's not achievable. And the Palestinians accept it. The Israelis sit silent at the table, silent. And Condi Rice speaks, and she declares it an agreement. And the next day's paper, the International Herald Tribune, touts it as a historic success in the Middle East. And she flies away to a meeting in Washington. And the reason I bring it up is that we're still using that as the basis of talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians. When we do talk, and when we do talk about movement and access, we say, well, you've got to open this channel right here, because It's in the November 15th, 2005 Agreement on Movement and Access that Condi Rice declared. So that bad drafting lived with us forever. That's what, 20 years we've been using a document that was worthless when it was not signed. It was not signed by either party. It was just simply declared an agreement. So, okay, that's probably all you can stand. And I'm glad to take any kind of questions, painful as they might be. Yes, ma'am.
How do you live with this? I mean, we're living with, I guess it's what we live with all the time. But when you see incompetent people, you know, you see the writing on the wall and.
Well, it's not easy. And I think about it at least every 5 minutes during the day, particularly because of the war. Because, you know, I'm still in touch with friends in Gaza, and we actually have a little relief organization, and I publish a Substack account of what we do with that newsletter and developments. And so when I get up in the morning, my first thought is I'm waking in a dry, warm bed, and nobody has shelled me overnight. And then I get up, and I'm in a warm, dry house, and I can go to the bathroom, and I use more water brushing my teeth than any Palestinian family has to use for the entire day. Right? And it goes on like that the whole day. And my wife could tell you it's a constant in our life, certainly my life, and I hope not so much in hers, since she ought to have a life to live. And it's, I can't blame it all on administrations because the Congress is so deeply in hock to Israel interests across the board. And in fact, if you read today, there was an article about Steny Hoyer being the godfather of the Israel lobby in Congress and his support for AIPAC and how every Democratic freshman in Congress is basically mandated to take the free AIPAC funded tour to Israel to get the program. So when I was there, a third of Congress, all 600 something, 500 something members, a third of Congress visited Israel every year on Israel's dime. And that's in addition to CODELs and stuff, congressional delegations. Okay, so that's it. No.
I know there's no answer to that.
No, there isn't, no. So, prospects for peace? Zip. Palestinians are screwed. We're going to be living with this for a long time. The United States is not going to take action despite the fact that to me, its U.S. national security interest would mean some sort of judicial settlement with the Palestinians, stop Israeli bombing of Syria that's trying to get a government under control, work with the Lebanese government rather than condone Israeli attacks on Hezbollah, and on and on and on. So, yes?
Have you written anything that is published?
I have that Substack paper that I published.
Are you planning on writing a book?
No, I don't think so. I don't think many people have an appetite for it. I think it would be kind of an exercise in burnishing my own ego to be able to put something in print. And, you know, there's a ton of people out there with books who are better connected than me, have greater stature, that sort of thing. So anyway, the Substack is normanolsen.substack.com. I apologize. This is terrible. Yes, sir. Way in the back. Yeah, then Joe.
What do you see as the best possible outcome to Gaza, given all the devastation there we see on TV on that?
Okay. There are 2 or 3 outcomes for Gaza, none of which involve self-determination or end of the occupation. So the preferred Israeli alternative is total ethnic cleansing, push them out. And the rest of the world has not accepted that yet. Although you probably read recently that Israel recognized Somaliland tacitly in return for Somaliland's agreement to accept Gazans who would be expelled. So the preferred option is total ethnic cleansing. The second option is let it go the way it is. The third option, if Trump presses, is redevelopment of Gaza, still under occupation and still subject to conflict. Joe.
What about the other Arab states? It seems historically they haven't really been supportive of the Palestinians.
Well, you know, they're getting tired too, right? So there's But there's a basic issue, and that is, why should the Arab states take on what is now 7.5 million poor Palestinians to remedy Israel's problem that they would say Israel created? What do you do with 7.5 million people? You drop onto Jordan, which is always teetering on the brink of failure. Egypt, which has an Islamic movement, they're fighting in the Sinai constantly and has huge economic problems. You're going to send them to Syria? Lebanon? Lebanon doesn't want them because Lebanon has the confessional government made up in the constitution of certain numbers of religious parties. They can't accept a whole bunch of Palestinians, even though they got probably 700,000 of them there now. So there's not much appetite, and who's going to pay for it? So at this point, for instance, the Israelis have responsibilities under numerous international accords, including the Fourth Geneva Convention, to allow the sustenance of Palestinians in Gaza and everything, and they don't. USAID has been funneling millions of dollars in there for years, all the international organizations, countries. Israel then routinely comes in and destroys that infrastructure, and then we rebuild it again. So is the United States going to then fund all these Palestinians to move and get settled someplace else? We won't do that, nor will any other country. Both because we don't want to support ethnic cleansing and because we don't want to pay the bill. Yes, sir. Man in the hat, and then Jim.
So my question is, what does Israel offer the world? It has so much value that the world doesn't tell Israel or boycott Israel or for them somehow to come to a meaningful agreement here.
Yeah. Well, the way I ask the question is, why is it in the United States' national interest to unequivocally support Israel? Okay. I mean, you can phrase it any way you want, but my interest from the first days of my Foreign Service career was U.S. national interest. And in my own mind, I had a calculation that always said any relationship the United States has to accrue a net benefit to the United States. So we can help other people, and if it's in our interest as well for other reasons, then that's a net benefit, okay? So say combating AIDS in Africa. Well, I have a friend who's a world-famous epidemiologist, and he once gave me, from the White House, his reasoning for why PEPFAR, President Bush's program on AIDS prevention, was critical. And it was mind-expanding. I couldn't repeat a word of it to you today, right? But it was just like, yeah, wow, we better get in there and fight against AIDS in Africa because it affects this entire list of vital U.S. national interests. And that's the way it is with most of these things. So when we give aid to, to Nile fever epidemic in Uganda or something, there's a net benefit for us. And always I look for the net, right? If it's good for both parties and a little bit better for us, that's good. But I can't find it in unequivocal U.S. support for Israel. It seems to have cost everywhere. Jim?
I'm afraid you're right that for the foreseeable future, we're not going to get any serious progress toward what we would call a genuine peace. But one of the elements that we imagine sometime getting there is a reform of the Palestinian Authority. Abu Mazen outlived his usefulness in that role.
Right.
Is Marwan
Barghouti, yeah.
Barghouti, I'm sorry. Is he an obvious choice for a better leader of that? And is that why Israel simply won't release it?
Yes and yes. He is an obvious good candidate. I can't evaluate them, I'm not in the bedroom every day with them. Barghouti is strong, he has a good following. But the United States, again, this is something I could elaborate on if we had a couple of days. The United States has done everything it could to emasculate and allow the emasculation of the Palestinian Authority ever since the days of Arafat. You all know now what we used to know privately, for instance, that Israel funded Hamas beginning in the 70s in order to be a counter to the PLO and Arafat, okay? To say funded Hamas, right? And they've been doing it up until the present. So now, for instance, Israel will not tolerate the talk of any role for the Palestinian Authority in governing Gaza. Well, what does that do to the Palestinian Authority? President Bush wouldn't even allow Abu Mazen to attend the General Assembly. That doesn't strike me as the United States looking for a real negotiating partner. And that's been part of the tactic for the whole time since the Nakba, is always saying that Israel has no counterpart negotiating partner. There's nobody capable of doing it. First of all, Arafat was a terrorist, so you couldn't clear with him. And then Hamas came in and weakened him and had created dissension and conflict. And it's continued all the way through. You remember how I said the CIA had its own foreign policy under the finding? Well, I won't go into it, but we used to talk to people and you find out what they were demanding, which was completely different than overt United States policy. So the fact that Abu Mazen is still there and is feckless and corrupt, to whatever degree, is largely the result of our actions and inaction.
Yeah, it's been 20 years since I've been on the ground.
Yeah.
But even then, he'd been in prison for some time. At that stage, I would see posters for him suggesting there was a popular following that could be galvanized to, if he were able to be leader of Palestinian, whatever.
He's got nothing. He's in hawk. He has no control over finances because those all come through Israel. Everything but the foreign donation, like all the tariffs and everything, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in tariffs that get held up by Israel as punishment for various actions. And we're never going to support elections again because Condi Rice supported them the first time and we got Hamas winning. Yeah. Can I just give one? We'll do your question in just a second. I get one anecdote that I really treasure. In the run-up to the election, in 2005, we were all talking about, Hamas probably won't win, and they might win one seat. But remember, we never talked to Hamas because they're terrorists, and we don't talk to terrorists. So you could never actually find out what Hamas was doing directly. So we're kind of dreaming this. And Condi Rice clearly thought that Abu Mazen was just going to walk away with this. Okay, so, sorry. I got two examples. So one day I'm sitting in my office, and this guy comes in. He's a cleared American. He's in the secure part of the embassy. And he tells me, he says, I'm Larry Sampler. I'm here from the USAID Office of Transition Initiatives, which was founded, by the way, by Rick Barton of Maine when he was assistant secretary there. Okay. And he says, got to tell you what we're going to do about the election. So sit him down, I bring my economic counterpart in, we're listening there, and we're all sitting in a circle. And he says, so here's what we're going to do to make sure that Abu Mazen wins the election. We're going to take all the aid projects and we'll make them banner openings that Abu Mazen is going to do. And we're going to do this and that, and we're building a new, okay? Yeah, and we're building a new press center where we're going to do the announcement, and he's going to declare victory when the election results come in. And we've even picked the backdrop, colored drapes, and they're going to be this color, and they're going to be hung in this way. And he goes on, and he says, and we're going to do this with no U.S. fingerprints on it whatsoever. And I said, very diplomatically, are you out of your fucking mind? True words, sorry. My economic section counterpart and I were just aghast. What are they possibly thinking? Like this is going to be a secret that you're up there with, putting up the drapes and everything. He went on, later rose to a number 2 level position in the U.S. Agency for International Development, brilliant career. And of course, wasn't anywhere at hand when the election results came in and Hamas won. And by the way, if you read Elizabeth Buemiller's book, a Washington Post correspondent about Condi Rice, it talks about Condi Rice being at the Watergate gym in her apartment complex and being on the treadmill and looking up at the television, Hamas won, and her saying, that can't be right. So, but the other thing was, I want to just talk about the delusion. Hang on to that question. The delusion, because sometime around then, I also had a visit from the Danish political counselor, Danish embassy, very lovely lady. And we're talking, and I'm giving her the party line, which is, well, we don't think Hamas is going to win. They might win a seat, but even if they win a seat, they may not even want to govern. They may not want the problems of governing. And then, like that, I looked her in the eye and said, you know, that's total bullshit. We've deceived ourselves into thinking that. And Hamas is very likely to win and take the whole government. I don't know what she reported back to Copenhagen about the conversation, but it just hit me like a thunderbolt, how far we had deluded ourselves because the Secretary of State had deluded us into thinking, well, this is going to be great, it's going to be democracy, and everything will be fine. Okay, yes?
I assume the CIA in that election knew the Israeli government was pushing Hamas to the...
We all knew. Yeah. But just how fast you can delude yourself when the 7th floor of the State Department has a brainstorm that it's going to do some brilliant piece of thing with no fingerprints. Yeah, really, I still can't get over Larry Sanford telling us the whole thing. We just can't believe it. Okay, another question? Yeah, gentleman in the hat.
The 300,000 or 400,000 Gazans.
Oh, yeah.
We have given Israel the armament to kill.
Yeah.
You must feel that their blood is on our hands.
Well.
And somewhat related to that, the reaction of young people across the United States.
Yeah.
Do you think that is sufficient to influence politics going forward?
No. But I was going to say, I try, not successfully, to not use terms like blood on their hands. I understand what you mean, because that immediately generates a visceral response. And so I would simply say, well, as far as I can tell, the Israelis dropped 200,000 tons of U.S. supplied munitions, U.S. made, U.S. supplied, U.S. financed munitions on an area the size of Lincoln, Saginaw, and Knox counties. So, and I used to try and tell my staff, don't talk about genocide. Genocide wasn't the term then, but there were various things. Don't use that inflammatory term. Just use plain English to say what happened. The IDF killed 4 people trying to cross the Green Line at Tulkarm, right? Don't do any more than that.
Could I ask one other?
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned in passing the Israeli recognition of Somalia. And isn't that part of the deal that the Israelis want those airfields that the Russians put in so they can bomb the Houthis just across the
Yeah, that's just as good an answer as Palestinian ethnic cleansing. Yeah.
And there's also reports that they were considering that remote area to displace the Gazans.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, I was going to go someplace with that. There is one other thing that since we're still sitting here. There's been a tactic that's been used for 80 years that is the excuse for not dealing with the Palestinians. And remember, I was there 9 years in that embassy, and I've heard a lot of it. After 48 and up through 67 and 73, the existential enemy, the enemy that was so strong, so determined to destroy Israel that you couldn't take time to deal with the Palestinians, were Egypt and Jordan, okay? Even though Jordan was very weak. And then after the peace agreements, the existential enemy became Syria. And throughout the 80s and 90s, it was Syria. Assad was an antichrist. He was everything bad. And if they let up one fraction and showed any sort of compromise with the Palestinians, Assad would be on top of them. And then Assad was basically neutralized. And then it became Hezbollah and Iraq, actually. And remember, we heard about Iraq was the existential enemy and it would bomb and gas. And of course, it did fight Israel, did attack it. And then, after Iraq was defeated, it became Iran. And now it's Iran and Houthis. And that is, I've heard this stated by our counterparts time and again, we can't possibly show weakness to those countries by showing compromise to the Palestinians. And it's become a convenient excuse. But now, Within the past year, Netanyahu has bombed Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. Where else? Anyway, so it's kind of wearing thin. And I have to look at it and say, how is this enhancing United States national security interests anywhere, let alone the Middle East? Because as we're now going to see with Venezuela, if the United States can attack anywhere, then everybody else feels free to attack anywhere. And so, don't know. Yeah, Pat.
I just want to say, so Norm does write his Substack column. He uses a lot of references in there. So he always uses articles from Haaretz and the Times. And so it is a good summary to look. Someone asked about some references. And we have real friends there that we follow. And we have a small fund people donate to. We are still able to actually send cash through bank transfer to several of our friends there who still maintain access to their bank accounts. And because of their, these are sort of leaders in their community, and they are then able to take money that we send and distribute it out. So we are getting firsthand information, photos. It breaks your heart, but they feel like we know them. We are paying attention to them. We had a Zoom with their daughters. We had one of the other friend's daughter translated. So we are actually impacting some few people, which is part of what helped us get through the news.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I actually, go ahead. But I have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to add one more anecdote. But go ahead.
You made the comment that the majority of Congress is supportive of Israel. Why?
You know, I don't think I want to delve into it.
We as citizens, people represent us.
Yeah. 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 Well, you know, you can read the accounts of domestic politics and their influence as well as I can. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to try to get tortuous here about this, but I will tell you one more story. Okay, there have been a lot of failed efforts. Okay, a lot of sincere efforts, a lot less sincere efforts, and efforts that were sincere and got gutted. And the most recent one, so all you remember, is Barack Obama, who in 2001, was it 2001? No, 2009, first day of his administration, appoints George Mitchell, Middle East coordinator, right? Now, if anybody knows George Mitchell, this guy's serious, right? I guess he's got a good sense of humor in private, but don't cross him. Don't think he's stupid. Don't think you're going to run over him. So I was really enthusiastic. Now, this is, 16 years ago. So I'm thinking, this is really something. And Obama had talked about Palestine in his campaign. So, thinking everything's great. And I'm not seeing, as months go by, I'm not seeing much progress. So, come September, Obama and Joe Biden, as vice president, were pressing hard for support to force Netanyahu to have a pause in settlement construction. Do any of you remember this? If you weren't involved, it probably wasn't that important, because we've done it time and again. And over the years, basically every time either John Kerry as Secretary of State or Joe Biden landed in Israel, the Israelis would announce a new settlement construction that day or the day after he left. So anyway, we think Obama's doing well. He's got George Mitchell in there. This is serious stuff. Mitchell had a good staff, apparently. And suddenly, we're trying to get this pause in settlement construction, and we're getting stonewalled. And then I read that, well, as an enticement for a 2-month pause in settlement construction, not an end, a pause, 2 months, we are offering $3 billion in munitions, weaponry, and other inducements. $3 billion for a 2-month pause. And Netanyahu rejected it. So we upped it to $3 billion for a 1-month pause. And Netanyahu rejected it. And I turned to Pat and said, George Mitchell is out of it. He's a dead man walking. That was Dennis Ross, who had been appointed as senior advisor for the Central Region. Remember, they made up a title for him? And while Mitchell is trying to negotiate peace, Dennis Ross wants to give him $3 billion for a 1-month pause. Okay, failed effort. Thank you all very much for attending. I can stay if anybody wants questions.
Thank you so much. Perfect.